Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Art of Procurement. So today's guest on The Art of Procurement is Tibor Shanto. Tibor is an expert in sales. So as an example, he was ranked 8th on the top 30 social salespeople in the world by Forbes, and in the top 25 sales influencers in 2014 by OpenView. So one of the themes of the Art of Procurement is to really get some outside perspectives on procurement so that we can learn to better partner with external influencers and with our stakeholders and really understand what other people are talking about us. Sales particularly, well, they're often seen as an adversary. So I was really interested and eager to do a deep dive on the relationship between procurement and sales and how we can foster collaborative relationships that ultimately help us to help our companies do what they do best, rather than just trying to nickel and dime our suppliers for the last cent of their profit margin. There are two key areas, I think, that come out of the interview with Tibor. One is, what can procurement learn as a function from sales as we look to sell ourselves and sell our own value proposition internally? Because really that's what we do with a lot of our time, is selling procurement to our stakeholders. Secondly, how can we partner with sales to build stronger win-win relationships for both the selling company and for our own organization? Okay, well, let's go to the show, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, and welcome to the Art of Procurement for today's episode. I'm delighted to welcome Tibor Shanto to the show today. So Tibor is a leading authority in the sales community, and really a highly acclaimed sales trainer. He has authored a number of books, including co-authoring an award-winning book called Shift, Harness the Trigger Events that turn prospects into customers. Tibor is the principal of Renbor Sales Solutions. At Renbor, he works with leading B2B organizations to help them achieve and increase on their sales goals. And I approached Tibor to appear on the show after reading a blog post discussing relationships between procurement and sales. So I find that sales and procurement professionals often have an adversarial relationship, but when both are focused on similar actions, that's really where the magic happens. So I wanted to explore further that relationship and get an outside look into procurement from a salesperson's perspective too. And that's one of the key things that I'm hoping to achieve with the Art of Procurement, is not just have it inward looking, but to get perspectives from the outside. So first of all, Tibor, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
My pleasure. It's fun to be here.
Thanks. So in the procurement space, I find that a lot of the people I talk to, and I'm definitely one of these people, we didn't arrive in procurement by design. You fell into procurement and enjoyed it, got the bug, and developed your career from there. So how did you get into sales?
Pretty much the same way.
Right.
And I think that what you say applies to many salespeople. And as you were saying it, I was saying, well, great, we already have something in common.
Right.
So much like you describe, I was sort of going down one path and made a left-hand turn, and found it to be a fruitful and productive neighborhood, so I just kept with it. And even in the role that I'm doing now, with respect to working with companies and helping them develop their salespeople, it was something that in a sales role came completely unexpected. And, had you spoken to me a year before I did it, I would have never thought that it would be someplace that I'd spent so many years. So
right.
I think a lot of salespeople, end up in sales through various different channels, whether they're in the company and a position comes up and they go into it, or a lot of times they see it as an entry level or an opportunity into sales and a means of getting into a company and moving on to marketing. But I think, as you said, enough people are enticed and intrigued by how it works that they stick around and actually make it their career path and are quite good at it.
So when you started off on your career, you're with Dow Jones, and I think across a variety of sales and solution type roles. What were the secrets of your success that really enabled you to quickly climb the corporate side of the ladder?
No, I would say the secret comes with recognizing certain things and sticking with them.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in execution and persistence, and I think that not just in sales, but if you look at athletes and other areas of discipline, sometimes the ones who seem to do it best are the ones who actually do it most.
Right.
So they practice the most, they rehearse the most, and then they take it onto the field, whatever that pitch might be, whether it's sales or sports or music or, I always point out the fact that, those of your listeners who are into jazz, will remember Charlie Parker, and he's always admired for his improvisation, but most people don't talk about the fact that he would practice hours and hours every afternoon. So when he got to the club, he would sound the way that he did. So I think that would be one secret. The other is to really continue to be curious, because the second you stop being curious and you think you know it all, you're probably going to look really stupid.
Right. You might know it all for that 1 second in time, but things evolve so quickly that you get left behind pretty quickly.
Yeah, you do have to be a bit more quick than you used to be, not just in the way that you execute, but the way that you plan and so forth. So there's the challenge of the perception of time moving faster. Right. It really isn't. It's just more stuff being put into it.
So how do you think, so you set up your own firm actually back in 2004, I think it was. What was the trigger that made you think that, or decide that that was the way that you wanted to go with your career?
My family and I had moved down to the States as part of a position with Dow Jones, and around 2004, we made the decision that we wanted to move back to Canada for various reasons, nothing to do with the States, but mostly around the family and things like that. And, those are those interesting turning points in life where if you're going to make a major move of the nature of moving your family from one country to another, it's an opportunity to sit back and say, what else do I want to change? Because now's the time, because we've leased the truck. We might as well make the most of it, right?
Right.
So, so somebody suggested that perhaps there's an opportunity to do the type of activity I did around developing sales development programs and delivering those to other companies, and that was the catalyst. So again, a convergence of events that probably a year before that would have looked entirely different.
And so you're now, 11 years into your journey, and I ask this because I think it's valuable for procurement professionals as they look to sell internally. My question is technology changing how you sell?
The question you ask, I get asked a lot because I tend to have a foot in both camps. I'm recognized as a social seller, which ostensibly is the latest and the greatest. And then I'm also, a card-carrying member of the cold calling club. So, I'm both modern and knuckle dragger at the same time. Certainly our perception of speed has changed, and so I think there's a lot of technology out there that, if utilized the right way, and I emphasize if, is an enhancer. What hasn't changed for me, and I think you can take it right back to Adam, Eve, and the serpent, is why people buy. And so if you leverage the tools and how you use them to better, connect with, align with, and then deliver value to as to why people buy, I think that's constantly changing. But the core thing, if you strip it down to the basics, why do business people do anything? It's to improve the state of their business. Whether that's from a financial point of view, or mitigating risk, or increasing productivity by buying a machine that maybe can automate something that they were doing manually before. So those things I don't think really have changed. I think if you go back to the 1800s and talk to an owner of a business, why they were making purchases probably haven't changed that much. Right. But the rest of it changes every day, and if you don't keep up, you could be in trouble.
So for a procurement professional that's wanting to engage and influence new stakeholders, what tips do you give them, or what advice would you give them to start really influencing people that they haven't worked with before, but somebody that they want to, build a relationship with?
It's interesting. I don't know if you've seen some of the work that's recently come out of, the CEB.
Yeah.
the corporate executive board, and so they were the ones who put out the Challenger sale a few years back, and just in the past month or two put out the Challenger customer. So it's quite an interesting read for, I would say, three constituencies: sales, marketing, and procurement. And one of the things that continues to come up in the Challenger sale is the fact that there's about 5.4 different stakeholders within the company who are involved in a purchase decision, and the dysfunctionality that leads to, and how salespeople can navigate that. So, to your question as to what could procurement do, I think one of the things that they talk about in the book is they encourage salespeople to find their mobilizer and to create consensus in the organization. And so I think that procurement as a role, so not as an individual person, but procurement, who's generally one of the 5.4 who are involved in this decision process, is in a position to create that consensus internally.
Okay, so shifting gears then, what's procurement's role from a salesperson's perspective?
Yeah, so I think one key role that procurement can play is to be the one that, is able to create consensus, to bring the message and deliver that to the salesperson in the process. And here I think is where some of the friction comes in between our two tribes, is that doesn't mean preventing the salesperson from having discussions with other stakeholders. And I'll give you an example. Yeah. I'm working with a company that's in manufacturing, and they manufacture things that go into like airplanes, right?
Yeah.
So I like those airplanes to be sound and safe. There's a comedian who had me going because he was saying that he's paranoid on the planes because he always has this thought that, everything on this plane was provided by the lowest cost provider, right, as opposed to the best provider. And he makes a point, right? So, they need to allow salespeople to have access to the people who are making decisions around the product and process, because good salespeople are subject matter experts.
Yeah.
And they could speak directly to an engineer and have a great discussion with him, and the company doesn't benefit from having an intermediary in there who's not maybe the expert that the other two people in the conversation are.
And so how often do you feel that the salesperson really is the subject matter expert?
Not often. I take your point, and as I say, I wear the same thing on our side, that, the 80-20 rule, whether it's 80-20 or 78-22, whatever the case is, no, that's one of the things that salespeople need to continuously work on. And subject matter expert doesn't mean that you know the features of your product better than anybody else, that you can recite, the last 5 years' worth of brochures. It's how do I make that apply to the customer's benefit? What impact can I deliver? So no, I agree with you that having what I call a real discussion from a subject matter expert, one of the things that I always say to salespeople is leave your product in the car. Leave the window open a little bit if you need it to breathe, but leave the product in the car and go in there and talk about how you've been able to help businesses like theirs. And that's not how your product fits their world, but have you helped them gain market share? Have you helped them reduce the cost of operation? Have you helped them extend the life of an asset? Have you been able to add to their reputation? I mean, all the things that procurement people and salespeople should be aligned on, right? So I don't think that part of my tribe is that big. So I agree with you. That conversation is not taking place as many times as it could. But I would throw back that even when a good salesperson who is a subject matter expert, it probably falls on deaf ears about the same percentage of time.
Yeah, and so I wasn't going there to say that it's just a sales issue for sure, because I think procurement has the same problem.
I think it's an important thing that I'm not sitting here saying that my whole tribe is, there is a lot of, and a lot of them are afraid to, one of the things that I thought was interesting a few years ago when the Challenger sale came out is, that they highlighted the fact that the person who is, the relationship person is not the one that's going to win the business, because at the end of the day, businesses want to move their objectives forward, and the one that they're going to look to is the the subject matter experts. So, and a lot of people are still touchy-feely.
My experience on the procurement side is certainly that, a lot of procurement people aren't necessarily subject matter experts, and I don't necessarily think that, for example, in a manufacturing environment, the role is less to be the subject matter expert and more to make sure you're facilitating the conversation between the right people who are, and, kind of helping direct that in a commercial way rather than being the gatekeeper.
I think another role, and again, let's assume that we're both talking about, that layer of our tribe that we would send to the Olympics, right? So I think the other that procurement people could do with the right partner at the other side is to really explain the purchasing process, like what they perceive and what they see happening. Because again, if they're speaking to the right salesperson, that's, again, what I tell the people that I work with is one of the benefits of becoming a subject matter expert is you can then present yourself to your prospects and to your clients as a conduit to best practices.
Yeah.
So I may not know exactly how things operate in your company, but I could share with you what I've seen with the last 100 companies that I've worked with. And again, I'm not saying that's giving away trade secrets,
right,
but I could speak in confidence as to what things work, what don't work, and so on. So I think that if procurement people were willing to have a discussion around the buying process and how things are going to unfold, as opposed to this being some secret nuclear, thing, then I think the conversation would go better.
Yeah, so I think a bit more transparency, perhaps on both sides, but so that it's more of a partnership rather than an adversarial relationship.
Yeah, sometimes I watch salespeople and procurement people, and it reminds me of those poker contests on the TV network.
Right.
Where it's like, oh, is he really bluffing, or does he really have two pairs? And so I think it does need to be a much more. How do we accomplish this together?
Yeah.
And again, I understand the pressures that the cost pressures and things along those lines, but. I think both sides need to be a bit more transparent in terms of even salespeople sharing how things unfold on their side.
And do you see that it's different based on the kind of product or service that's being bought or sold? So if it's something that's highly complex that brings a lot of value to the buying company, do you see that procurement approach that differently than if it's a commodity item, where you can buy it from one of 10 companies with no problem tomorrow? So do you see procurement and sales approach both of those conversations in a different way, or is it pretty consistent?
No, I mean, I think it's degrees of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think there's an acceptance that, if you're selling nails, it is going to come down to a fairly simple process, even if they pretend to have some sort of tender process in place and so on. I think it's more pronounced when it gets more complex because the salespeople get frustrated because they know that they have questions that procurement is not in a position to answer, and that's not because they're stupid, but it's not their job, right? They, so I've seen many instances, whether in construction or construction material or high tech and so on, where an architect may have spec'd a certain product, but a provider has a different idea, and if if the architect was aware, they might take that into consideration. Right. Yet, when they perceive that procurement is preventing them from talking to the architectural team, there's this perception. So I don't think it changes based on the complexity, but I think the degrees of it, and you notice it more, because, again, if you're selling nails by the pound, you're going to live with the fact that you lost because you're a half cent more expensive.
Right.
But, again, I'm aware of one particular situation where it's a high-tech situation where the salesperson had a valid question and quite a serious one because the part was going into a defense type of thing. And the procurement person was just hung up on letting them talk to the engineering in question. Mm-hmm. Yet the procurement person wasn't able to answer the question. That makes you suspect as to whether they can actually take the correct question to the engineer and bring back a complete answer that doesn't get reinterpreted and sort of some of the words dropped in the hallway. So, I think they should be facilitating communication but it's more pronounced or more noticeable in the more complex products. But I think it comes down to the personality.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're a small man selling nails, you're going to be a small man selling rockets, right?
Right. And when so when you're working with procurement professionals, what signals are they providing that make you know whether it's somebody who's knowledgeable about the product or service or the market, when they're not, and does that change the approach of the seller based on how knowledgeable the procurement professional is on what it is that you're selling?
What I work with salespeople to create a positive, interaction with procurement people, it's not so much how well they know the product and so forth and so on, because again, it's an unfair expectation because that's not their role.
Mm-hmm.
The engineer might, or the product designers or the design team or whatever. More, it's how well are they versed in the whole process. So how did this project come about, or how did this product come about? What were some of the things that have been tested to date? What were some of the, what's the flow of the product and things like that? So what that indicates to me is that they're actually involved in the decision and have understood why one sort of process was picked over the other or one direction over the other. Yeah. And that way you get a sense of confidence that when you're talking to them, they're actually taking input and sort of are open to ways of achieving the goal as opposed to have already decided that they want this, that, and the other, and are now completely closed to hearing an alternative path to the same point that may be better from a cost point of view, maybe better from a production point of view, pick any factor. So if they can't answer critical things around how the process was made, where the product launch is, or where the design is, or whatever the thing the question is, that they're basically going to try and find the spec as opposed to find something that will help them achieve what they want to achieve. Yeah. So the conversation I encourage them to have is how well do they understand the objectives, the goals, what the company is trying to achieve with this. And if they could talk to that, then I think it's a much better procurement person to talk to, because they're concerned about the right outcomes as opposed to the right purchase.
Right. And what kind of things do you see that procurement professionals are doing consistently that's hindering the ability to get value for money?
I think, so there's a couple of things. First of all, just the complete sort of lack of information that they provide. Yeah. So it's one thing when you don't know, fine, I could live with that, be a man and say, I don't know, I'll find out, I'll get back to you, right? But it's when they know and they don't share it with you, and there's no practical reason. It's not like if they shared it with you, they'd have to kill you, right?
Right.
It's like it's something that's germane to the project. If the salesperson was smart enough to ask it, then, you should at least acknowledge that, hey, you know what, I don't know, but I'll find out. Uh-huh. Well, hey, I don't know, but maybe if you talk to Josie, the engineer, she might tell you. Or if you talk to our production manager, Henry, he'd be able to tell you. But it's when so if they don't have that, so if they won't, if they'll say, if they won't give you access to the information, B, if they have it and they don't share it, to me, it's not that it's frustrating as a salesperson, but you look at there and you go like, do I want to own shares in that company if this is how they do things? There's no, to me, there's no purpose to that at all. The other is is a more abstract thing, but I faced it, and I talked to a lot of salespeople and so on, and especially when they hide behind process.
Yeah.
It's like whether it's a RFP process or, I've seen this both in my experience and others, like a vendor will have a question and then they'll go and share that with the whole competitor. Right. Well, if you're looking for somebody that's, the best at what you're looking for, doesn't the fact that they're asking more intelligent questions, shouldn't that be a leg up as opposed to something that now you share with everybody? Right. Whether it's a formal RFP or whether it's not, I've just seen, like there's a perceived tendency, and I emphasize perceived tendency, to see procurement as somebody who's going to boil things down to the lowest common denominator as opposed to reward the differentiator.
Right, and my opinion really is that it differs based on the product and service that you're buying. Because when you're buying something like the nails example that we used earlier, well, there really is only a common denominator for that, and that's price, because there's an expectation that all other things are equal. When you're looking at products and services that are a lot more complex, maybe where the value proposition isn't as easily compared on an apples-to-apples basis, and where it's something that's really valuable to the business and really contributes to their competitive advantage or the core of their business, then that's when you want to be looking at different approaches and then looking at sourcing on a value basis. And that's where supplier relationships and the value of your relationships really come to the fore.
One of the things I work with salespeople on is, again, you hear the word value. We used it probably a half dozen times now in this conversation, right? Yeah, you talk to whether it's people on the procurement side or whether it's people on the sales side, and, I always humorously say, but it is factual, that if you ask 5 salespeople to define value, you get 7 different definitions, because the first 2 will change their mind based on what the next 3 say, right? And I'll go out on a limb and say it's not that different on the procurement side. So I think what we say is, let's start this whole discussion with what I call an actionable definition of value. And it's on our website, it's in all our workbook, and that is that a customer will see value in anything that removes hurdles or helps them overcome hurdles or bridges gaps between where they are and where their objectives are.
Yeah.
So I encourage salespeople to share that with procurement people, whoever it is that they're selling to, so they understand how we perceive value, which is, how can we help you achieve your objective?
Yeah.
I think at that point you can have a value-based discussion, because A, it's been defined. So if they say to them, Mr. Customer, can you agree in that as being a standard of value? And they're going to say yes, right? Because who doesn't want to achieve their objectives? But now at least you have this platform to work from. So I think that if procurement can buy into that and the salespeople can buy into that, then we should be able to put cost in balance. Yeah. And as I say, I'm often able to reduce, or at least I see a lot of people with products able to reduce the overall cost structure of something for a client, but at the same time increase their own invoicing because they've created their balance. So I think if we can get both sides to agree and then maintain a value-based sale, a lot of this would work itself out.
When we look as a profession in procurement as ways that we can have a bigger impact on the revenue side of the equation, then something that's kind of at the front of mind is innovation. And how can we help our business units basically to win in the fields that they play in by helping them access innovation within our supply base? A lot of talk around doing that is centers around becoming a customer of choice. So being the partner that an innovative supplier actually wants to work with and wants to partner with, so that we can go to market first together with any innovative products that a supplier may have. So my question is, what can procurement do to help build that that position and that relationship of being a customer of choice? And I guess a follow-on question from that is, from the sales perspective, is a customer of choice, does it lead to preferential treatment with the customer who's the customer of choice, or is that really a myth and it really doesn't have any impact whatsoever?
I wouldn't call it preferential treatment. I think I call it smart business, right? You want to encourage those things that are good for your company.
Right.
So if this buyer has been good, they've been whatever measure of good is, and we can get into that at a different time, right? But let's accept that they've been good. Then I think you want to keep those customers. It's like a good business. Let's look at it differently. If you're a retailer and you have something that's consistently flying off the shelf, so even though it might be slightly smaller margin, but it's consistent, it's good, the customers love it, it's easy to work with, and so on, then you're going to put more of that on the shelf because it's better business. So I look at a customer of choice. Yeah, I might make a couple of points less, but it's consistent. It maybe takes friction out of somewhere else in the flow. So, I don't look at it as better pricing. I look at it as protecting those things that make sense for my company.
Right.
So I think that, good sales organizations are good companies by extension, because sales is one filter on this. It's how they interact with your customer service, with your finance people, and so on, also comes into the equation. But if there is a customer of choice, I think they should be rewarded. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Right. Well, I know that we've spent some time on the phone today, so I just really want to thank you for being on the podcast. Where can my audience go if they want to learn more about you?
The easiest place is my website. By the way, thank you. It's been fun. I do think the conversation is important, so because I think together salespeople and procurement could make a difference to their respective companies. So I do thank you for the opportunity. People can find me. The easiest place is www.sellbetter, SELLBETTER.ca for Canada, CA. Or you can phone me at +1 416 822 7781.
Awesome. Well, I will pop your contact details online as part of our show notes. So the show notes links to material that we referenced today. I'm going to compile all those, put them online, and those will be located at artofprocurement.com/sales. So that's artofprocurement.com/sales. So with that being said, Tibor, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.